give her a hand. We have this amazing PRSSA chapter. They are just the most involved, engaged students. We love them. I also have to recognize the mastermind of all this, the brilliant and talented Dr. Gia Pressgrove, who never says no to any crazy idea that I put in front of her, and who has a few crazy ideas of her own, which we love in the College of Media. So I want you to take a moment and just appreciate the space that you are in. And I hope today you recognize what a truly transformational space is. Our Media Innovation Center, we launched it in January of last year, so it's a very new space on campus. It has become the premier innovation space at WVU and on the Evansdale campus, and we're very, very proud of it. We designed this space really for a couple of reasons. One was we wanted to create a modern learning lab for our students and our faculty in which they could create and test new forms of industry practice to really push the boundaries of journalism and strategic communication. And I think we're doing that, as you'll see today. We also developed this as a place to collaborate, to bring together people from across academic disciplines, to bring in industry partners, to work with community groups on how to use modern digital tools to enhance storytelling and communications. And so the way that it's designed is it's very open, it's flexible, and really there are not a lot of boundaries, right? Everything opens up to everything else. And so it allows a lot of movement in the space, and you can have a little kind of quiet time in one corner, and then you can have big events like this, and we've got our Maker Lab, and it's really a very creative space, and it's supposed to inspire creativity, and I hope you feel that today. A centerpiece of our Innovation Center is our Innovator in Residence program. And this was a program we started formally 2 years ago on the journalism side with our Knight-funded Innovator in Residence program. And the way it works is we bring in national media communications experts who come in for a single semester. They work with students on a project, and they co-teach a class. And in doing so, they are helping us, again, kind of push the boundaries of storytelling, audience engagement, and communications. And so we bring in people who are what I would call, I guess you could say, change agents, doers within their own organization, kind of troublemakers, if you will. The people who question the way things are always done and say, how can we do it differently, and what are the latest tools that we can use and strategies. So on the journalism side, that has resulted in projects and new courses in data journalism, sensor journalism, 360 video, augmented reality, you name it. And now this semester we've launched our strategic communications innovator in residence program, because we recognize that the industry, advertising, public relations, all the areas that you work is also being radically transformed by technology and the new ways that audiences engage with information. So we were able to launch it this spring with the generosity of Tom Harrison, who is an alum of the university and was the former CEO of DOS, which is by far the largest agency in Omnicom, which is the largest marketing communications group in the world. And so we launched it this spring with the Harrison Omnicom Innovator in Residence in strategic communications, and we are launching it with this very, very crazy, wonderful partner, and his name is Ben Roffee, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about Ben. Ben is from Riot, which is the R-Y-O-T, not R-I-O-T, which is the immersive storytelling agency within the Huffington Post. He was born in Venezuela, and he was raised in Southern California. He received a job offer in 2014 that ultimately changed his life. Riot is, as we said, an immersive media company within within Huffington Post, and they hired Roffee as their culture and social editor. He has since advanced to Riot's digital director, and he's helping to create immersive storytelling and engaging audiences with experience that bring attention to issues that are happening all over the world, and you'll see some examples of his work. He's also like super, super cool. So in a moment, he's going to come up here, but first we have a commercial break. So thank you all for coming, and have a wonderful, wonderful day in our Innovation Center.
Hi everyone. When you came in, you received a ticket, so we're going to do a little drawing now, so get that out again. All right, if you have ticket number 598186, congratulations, you have won a New York Times Google Cardboard, so raise your hand if that's your number. Congratulations. We're going to do 2 more drawings throughout the day, so no worries. You still have an opportunity to win. Thank you, guys.
Hello, everyone. How you guys doing today? Thanks for coming out. I know some of you guys came from distances, so as did we. So yeah, I'm Ben. I want to first of all thank Mary Ann and Gia for having me. Getting to work here has been really exceptional for me, just because I've spent some time in a lot of the programs that are kind of delving into VR and so-called immersive storytelling. And I mean, I think it's reflected not just in the facility, but the interest of all the students in helping out, and how passionate the community is here around doing some really innovative thinking and breaking away from some of the old models of doing things, but in a way that is thoughtful and I think it's going to contribute a lot to the industry. So it's pretty exciting. I think being a student right now is going to be one of the most exciting times if you're kind of in this world, because as you'll see myself and some of the colleagues that I have on the panel here today, we're all probably a little younger than some of the people you're used to seeing. Someone who's 49 years old can have about as much experience as a 26-year-old in the field of immersive storytelling. So it's kind of cool, and these are some of the first minds that are being educated in this sense, this way. So I wanted to start off by asking some of you guys, just like as a show of hands, how familiar you were maybe before you came into the building with immersive formats, so like VR, AR, anything of that nature. Just by a show of hands, how many of you guys had an awareness of what that was, or had some sort of experience? Okay. And so for those of you that weren't, did you get a chance to check out the AR in here, kind of headset and some of that stuff? So I think that, at a really superficial level, a lot of us are gaining an understanding of what immersive storytelling is. But for those of you that didn't raise your hand the first time around, can I just ask you kind of what drew you to coming today, knowing that this would be kind of a component of what we were talking about? Is anybody, was it a curiosity, or does everybody want to share, what drew them here today? Anybody?
I have a small business, and marketing increasingly is storytelling.
Right.
And if you're storytelling and not doing it with digital media, you're kind of missing.
And what kind of small business do you mind if I ask?
I run a fitness business for people 55 and older, so it's an older demographic who aren't as familiar with technology, but nonetheless.
And are you noticing that audience is utilizing digital formats more and more?
Yes.
Well, hopefully, the reason why I was brought here is obviously because of my chops, in the immersive realm. But I think that, prior to that, there's a long history, and I think we'll touch on it later on in this discussion about the experience I've had at Riot and kind of being a part of this new wave. But yeah, that's the reason why I was brought here is that. But I think that there's a lesson to be learned about immersive storytelling here and immersive formats that will inform our broader use of digital storytelling. And I think that's kind of where I want to start things off. It's kind of an exercise in what we even call immersion or immersive storytelling. So right now, everybody, is just a matter of linguistics, is kind of bundling virtual reality, mixed reality, augmented reality into this immersive, just bubble, right? Everyone, it's kind of this new thing, it's a buzz term in a lot of the tech sphere. And as someone who's worked in it for a while, I wonder if maybe...
That makes me really uncomfortable. I can't hear you.
Oh, sorry guys. I sound so loud to myself. So yeah, as someone who's worked in this space for a while, I feel like it's a little arrogant and presumptuous to try to wrest the word immersiveness, immersion from the rest of storytelling. And part of that is that I feel like we're kind of ignoring some masters, right? I mean, some of my first encounters with immersion were J.R. Tolkien. I mean, the man created words with ink and paper and wood fibers. That's all he had to work with, and he invented worlds that we spent, hours of our lives and had, lasting impacts on our culture and have, spawned entire industries of literature and, or Dark Side of the Moon, Pink Floyd, something that is transportational. It's an album that you can, put on in the dark and drift to another world. Anything that my grandfather says, the sound of his voice is, like a song, and it has so much meaning in it, and so those to me are immersive experiences. And so to right off the bat with these new technologies try to take ownership over this, I think does a disservice to a lot of the great work that our forebears have done. So I guess the question is then, what is it about immersive experiences that make them immersive, right? And to me, I think that they're translating ideas and feelings into an experience, right? And that can be format agnostic. I mean, that can be spoken over a fire, that can be read in a magazine, it can be in a headset. And I think it's something that we've all been encountering for our conscious life. And so I think just as an exercise for kind of prepping us into how we want to bridge all this into digital storytelling, I think we need to reclaim what immersive storytelling is. And immersive storytelling is creating these experiences from things that we have either experienced or other people have experienced, and translating them in a way that people aren't just receiving information, but they're feeling it, and they're somehow connecting with that experience. Now, part of the reason why I think we started calling these formats immersive is because of the immediacy of the access to that experience. I mean, you can, to bring back Tolkien again, I mean, it would take hours, days to really get into that world. You can put on a headset and you can, in moments, do some of what Tolkien did, which is transportation, and give you a sense of presence in the story. So to me, immersive storytelling is just storytelling done right. It's translating experiences to people. And so from that, and I don't want to diminish the work that we do. I think it's been really important, but I don't want to, I'm always going to say immersive storytelling with those, little cheeky quotes, because I think that we need to start breaking away from, that narrative of it being exclusively, AR, VR, because there's so much more to that. And for everyone here who are professionals in trying to translate digital storytelling, I think there's something that we can, learn from that. So yeah, basically, as a bullet point, VR, AR, mixed reality, they don't have a monopoly on immersion. And I think that's kind of where you guys come in the story, because half of VR so far, I think, has been PR, right? If it wasn't for that, I don't think that your first encounter with VR would have been some of the first encounters you've had. It'd probably be like a year from now, it'd be gaming or porn or something, weird. So, and that's a consequence of some people who were very early on saw the power of this as a story, as a method of storytelling and translating experience that could be adapted from different impulses of communicating good ideas and evoking change, all these things. But PR has driven the narrative around immersive storytelling quite successfully. I mean, it's forecast right now, depending on whose measure you go by. Sometime around 2020, it's going to be a billion-dollar industry. Now, this is the VR, AR, all these things combined. This is hardware. This is the software. This is the marketplaces for all this stuff. It's as a whole. So I mean, that's a pretty good, that's a pretty great job on the PR side of selling on a promise that up to this point has been largely untapped. We're just now having headsets hit the consumer marketplace, and it's not really yet tipped the needle. People are a little concerned about the sales haven't been where they had hoped. The uptake has largely been most of the consumption has been on social platforms, on Facebook and YouTube. So, and to what extent is that really immersive? So, early on, for the if you are familiar, people like Ana de la Peña, Chris Milk, and this is not bagging on them by any means, but they really sold this as as a mechanism for evoking empathy, right? Chris Milk gave a famous TED talk about VR having the potential to be the ultimate empathy machine, and I think at the time they were right, and I don't think that in those early days that they were wrong to assume that it was an empathy machine. I mean, you could put on those headsets and instantly connect with people. And since then, I think a lot of the narrative around immersive storytelling, for those of us that are working not in gaming or entertainment, has been about trying to evoke empathy. As journalists at Riot and documentarians and storytellers who take a more subjective stance, obviously a lot of that comes from our desire to create empathy. But I think that any empathy device is subject to diminishing returns, right? The same way, you kind of roll your eyes at any, a Sarah McLachlan PSA over, an ASPCA commercial. It doesn't stick anymore, right? That works for a time, and that was a device that worked. But with any device, that's trying to induce empathy, we will eventually tire of it. Just, even us, we've seen some horrific things in a headset. From natural disasters to, abject poverty, and when we put the headsets on now, I don't get that same emotional response. And that's where this realization comes from. It comes from having spent so much time looking at this and seeing that, yeah, maybe it's not exactly, maybe it's not an empathy machine. For people's first experiences, and to demonstrate the potential of it, I think that was totally the case. But now what we're trying to do is evolve the narrative, I think. And I think that's part of the problem with good PR, is that sometimes it misleads. I'm sure any of you who work as PR professionals or work with PR professionals know that sometimes you have to kind of tweak narratives to make things, seem appealing. And that's where I think the only problem now is I think that we've just misappropriated the use of some of these words, like immersion and empathy. I think immersiveness is describing an intrinsic value of something. It's not a format, it's not, to describe a format as immersive strips away the fact that a good story, regardless of, as we talked about earlier, the immersiveness is intrinsic in that story and how you communicate it, right? And so where the device or the physical thing that you use to consume it, the sensory thing that the input is not the actual point of immersion. It's the point before it. It's how you got there. In the same way, I think empathy is a function of humanity. It's not something that you manufactured in a device for us to ingest, And so I think that there's a lot of excitement early on because of the emotional reaction we could produce in people with these, with these formats. But I think now we're starting to realize that it's a little bit more nuanced than that. So why beat up on the language around immersive storytelling? I'm not a bully. I'm not trying to stake a claim and be this, controversial figure in VR. I think this is a conversation that I'm having with a lot of my colleagues. A lot of them feel like we need to advance the narrative around it. And I think that's because it's unfair to digital storytelling. Like I said, it's, these VR, AR, and the PR around it has co-opted immersion. And I think that the danger in that is it liberates these immersive formats from the burden of whatever that kind of mixture of brilliance and the necessity of survival and expressing ideas that we come to identify as good storytelling. It relieves them of that necessity. And I think that by recognizing that, we can pull it back and get back to the roots of what inspired us to begin with to be good storytellers. So this is kind of where I want to narrate the parallels that I've witnessed through my experience at Riot. As a show of hand, how many of you guys have heard of Riot outside of this? And don't feel weird if you haven't. We're pretty small little. Well, 2 of them have worked with us. No worries, guys. I mean, we've always been a kind of a ragtag bunch. When I started at Riot, we were in a 2-bedroom house in Venice Beach. I came on as a staff writer. We were doing basically predominantly digital print, aggregating news, chasing clicks, and doing advertorial content and documentaries. Prior to me joining, Riot was essentially born in a tent in Haiti by two humanitarians, Brent Mooser and David Dart. They started making documentaries kind of with the idea of how do you keep people interested in a place after the news cameras are gone. You know, they were in Haiti after the fact when cholera broke out, and they were, you know, starting Little League. They started the first Little League baseball team there, and trying to build movie theaters and trying to tell these stories that would evoke empathy and would inspire people to somehow connect to this far-off place in the forest country in the Western Hemisphere. And so they had an idea, which was to use the format of news, which is journalism, to connect people with formats that they could take action. So whether it was, you know, finding a, you know, and maybe it was just pulling a story off the AP Newswire. They would link it to an organization, vetted of course, that was working in that space that you could donate to or volunteer with, and that was the kind of the ethos from which we sprung. And this was happening at a time when BuzzFeed was getting really big, and Elite Daily and clickbait and all that stuff was really, you know, kind of at the tip of the spear of digital storytelling. That was the new trend, and that's when I came into the mix. Now, with time, we noticed that like the nature of how that was happening, which was coming through Facebook and these algorithms and gaming things, wasn't really contributing, and it wasn't really moving the needle in the way we wanted. But we'd always had that grounding in filmmaking, and we'd always continued to make films throughout that time period. We would eventually transition away from the, you know, the destination, you know, click chasing model to predominantly operating on social media, where we found a lot more success. And that was our first real moment where we were, you know, reaching a lot of people. You know, we're getting 120 million video views a month around these, you know, these popular formats, the text over the videos, and now this, all that stuff. You know, we did for a while. And then in March 2 years ago, Haley, our head of films, had an idea with a filmmaker who was doing a piece around prison reform, a film around prison reform, had an idea to do a piece around solitary confinement, and that was basically just a 360 photograph with sound design. And that was our first, you know, immersive experience. There's no story to be told. You just put the headset on and you were there. And then after that, when the Nepal earthquake happened, we had kind of just through chance somebody in a rush hand off a 360 camera to David, one of our founders, as he was heading off to Nepal. And he came back with some footage, and it was just shocking. And the reactions that people had to just seeing that was so profound. And for us, that was a moment where we realized that nobody was really doing this in the journalism space, and we had a real opportunity to change people's thinking around topics using this format. And so that's kind of where, you know, Riot's hard left turn was, you know, one, it was huge to our survival. You know, as a business, we weren't doing much in terms of getting traffic or getting monetizable, you know, social impressions and all that. And so we made a hard turn into VR, and it kind of ended up being our salvation. Within a year and a half of that, we were approached by Huffington Post, who we had done a project called The Crossing with, which is a 360 series that was hosted by Susan Sarandon around the refugee crisis in Lesbos. This was kind of at the height of that. And we had a really successful encounter where we were using our 360 storytelling chops, which at this time were still very unrefined, and the Huffington Post's reach and, you know, the ethos that they have to tell these important stories. And from that, they, you know, had inquired about what our future was, and that led to our acquisition by AOL, who owns Huffington Post, who's actually owned by Verizon. So we were kind of brought into this apparatus initially as the immersive storytelling wing of Huffington Post. Now, since that time, things have evolved a lot. We've gotten a lot better at 360 storytelling, and we've refined that. But we've also gotten back to some of our roots, which is multimedia packaging around stories. And that's where I think, and in addition to that, doing, you know, continue to do documentary filmmaking, and that's where we started to realize that as a collective effort, it wasn't enough for us to just create 360 experiences. At activations, they worked great, but it was hard to get people to experience them other than in a social media feed where it's not, considered immersive by a physical sensory standard. It's just a little window in your phone, which is cool for a moment. It's not necessarily, evoking the change that people were when they were putting on a headset in the way, you felt like you were there when you put on the headsets here. So we realized that we had to broaden our focus again. And in that same time span, we were also realizing that still our most successful endeavors were documentary films. Last year we had a short documentary called Body Team 12 nominated for an Oscar. This past year we had another short documentary, Watani, which was about a Syrian refugee family, again nominated for an Oscar. So these were, by society standards, our most successful endeavors, and they were documentary films. Even though we had become, the leaders in 360 documentary storytelling, alongside the New York Times and CNN, we realized that still people were coming to, or people were experiencing our work most profoundly in formats that weren't necessarily immersive. And so I want to connect this back to digital storytelling, because it was through this shift in immersive storytelling that we found, again, the imperative to be good storytellers across the board in a digital sense. And in that, we've run more and more into the question, both internally and externally, why 360? Why AR? Obviously, everybody wants more immersive experiences. We want to push the limits. We're inundated by media every day, and we're oversaturated with the inputs of and the continually refined, algorithmically and scientifically means of feeding us content that we want. But the reality is that often these stories are unexceptional in the sense that the way that you see them or perceive them, while the meaning might be significant, they don't necessarily translate as something at face value that's exceptional. And that's why 90% of the 360 footage we have is probably really boring. It's just trees blowing in the wind, kids running around. It's, reality, most of it is really boring. And not boring in the sense that like it makes you fall asleep, but it's, we live our lives, the biggest markers in our lives are our highlights, right? And everything in between is kind of a meditation on those moments. And so we, thinking back to what I loved about my grandfather is that he has a tendency to embellish things. And I'm sure you guys probably all have people that you know that tend to exaggerate things a little more than others. But welcome to storytelling. I mean, Hunter Thompson in the 90s admitted that most of his drug use, some of his drug use was exaggerated. Now, that doesn't change the fact that he was probably high as a kite most of the time he was doing stuff, but it was a device he used, to create that gonzo experience and to really pull people in and to give people a sense of shock and heighten the experience. And that's something that dates back to Shakespeare. The language is so not, has such little utility, even in a classical English sense. I mean, it's all poetry and meter and adheres to these very specific rules. And that's because it's intended to exaggerate and emphasize and draw people in. And so through so many means we exaggerate. And that's what storytelling, as we're trying to realize, is becoming. Now sometimes for VR that's hard because you're trying to create, if this is still working and it's streaming in 360, it's just me talking up, in a room to some people that are interested. But probably to the other several billion people in the world, maybe this isn't that interesting. This is an unremarkable moment. And so I would have to go out and say, yeah, the room was packed with 800 people, and they were hanging from the rafters cheering at the speech. It went really well. And for people to be like, whoa, that was really cool, And so sometimes it's not so important for us to really discern the difference between the truth and the yarn, Sometimes we need to use that to our advantage. That doesn't mean lying about things, but that means that sometimes we have to convey messages to people in ways that feel as exceptional as the experiences that we have are, Because without being here, if you had to be there, you would understand, Hendrix at Woodstock was a transcendental experience that you guys would just never understand. We hear from, our parents. And yeah, it's right, we'll never experience that, So we have to live through your version of it. We have to live through the way that it was told and conveyed to us. So the reason why I bring all this up is because I think it points to a classic dilemma here that we have, which is especially in immersive formats, which is showing versus telling. When are we story showing and when are we storytelling? And I think that making that distinction is where we start to realize the benefits of using immersive formats like virtual reality, mixed reality, and the benefits of using other forms of format of communication, whether it's a podcast or a billboard or a flash mob. Any of these things, are different ways that we're telling things, right? And sometimes it's a packaging around, particularly for us working in immersive content, it's a packaging around, and it's the suite of things and experiences that we build around it that tell the story. And by simply putting something on, thinking back to that solitary confinement piece, by just putting that on with no context, having not been standing at Tribeca where it was being communicated to you that prison reform is a serious issue and solitary confinement is a potentially cruel form of punishment that people are being subjected to for psychologically inappropriate lengths of time, then you wouldn't necessarily know what you're experiencing. You wouldn't know what the purpose of that was, but it was the context of that moment. It was an activation at Tribeca, where the filmmaker was there communicating those ideas to you. And that was the telling part. The showing was just a scene in 360. Even with Nepal Quake Project, which was our, I told you was our second VR film. Susan Sarandon, again, worked with us on that piece, and she was the one that provided the voiceover, and she was the one that was helping to amplify it. She's someone that people in society, whether or not you believe that celebrities should be involved in activism. I mean, Susan's been a wonderful person and very, altruistic in her. I think some people probably employ that as their own personal PR as celebrities, but having worked twice now, you could definitely say that her intentions are good. And she was the one that was telling that story. And it's hard to find somebody locally to tell that story when everyone you're filming is digging their loved ones out of rubble, And in that moment, in that earliest phase, the only way we could think to tell that story was to have somebody who people look to and trust to communicate, some of these problems from the world. Now, since that time, and especially Avery and I have worked a lot on this, we've tried to figure out how we can get, rather than having someone else tell that story, how someone can tell the story who is experiencing that moment that we're describing, nativizing that experience. And I think that's where we're at today with Riot. And I think that as storytellers, that's become kind of the staple of what we want to be doing. So, thinking about that in a broader sense, we have to look at storytelling in this regard as helping people amplify the messages and of the experiences they want to do. Because otherwise, if we are trying to create immersive experiences and we don't have necessarily a direct franchise in that person or that group's experiences, then we're trying to translate something that maybe we have never experienced. Even now, in the last year, I went to a dozen countries and covered everything from the hurricane. You guys, all these things in this AR room here are just snippets of some of the things we experienced. Being in Puerto Rico where they're not allowed to vote for the president, or being in Rio de Janeiro where they have underground parties where they, put jumper cables into telephone wires to party their DIY sound systems because they live in favelas and that's how they entertain themselves. Or Hurricane Matthew, and its damage on the Tiburon Peninsula. Having been to all those places, like how, I just dropped in on those for a moment, a week at most. How do I have license to tell that story for them? Now, in the case of Haiti, for instance, we were there for a day and a half, and again, in these crisis zones, it's hard to pull people out and find that character. And so we had to kind of resort to, in that particular instance, I had to narrate my experience because we didn't feel like it was fair for us to necessarily put words in people's mouths and to me that transit experience. It was more the story that became about like what it's like to drop in on a disaster zone and then get helicoptered out. In other cases, we've worked to find ways to identify those characters that really speak most powerfully about those stories. And so as digital storytellers, our future looks a lot more like that native experience. and using our expertise to help them package the story around it, and mobilizing the technology around those experiences, and making it, because sometimes trying to translate the story of a villager in Papua New Guinea, they're not going to know some of the best practices around VR filmmaking or how to do a multimedia landing page. These are things that, so I think that we need to reconsider what our role is as the storytellers in this, and being a good digital storyteller is sometimes passing the baton to somebody else that experienced it and helping them be the one and elevating their narrative through our knowledge and expertise. So I think this brings up an interesting point for us, because now understanding where Riot's at and kind of where we feel digital storytelling is heading, it's interesting to kind of to take a moment and look at where we're at right now and where things are heading. And we're realizing more and more that things are heading actually back towards reality, which isn't to say that VR is going to dwindle as an industry. It's going to continue to grow. AR is by an order of magnitude going to continue to grow and come to become probably one of the largest industries mankind has ever known. But we're coming back to reality in the sense that a lot of these technologies are bringing us back to the physical world. They say adults right now are spending about 10 hours a day connected to the internet somehow. Now, yes, you may be in front of a computer for that time, but how often does the sound of the air conditioning or the drab fluorescent lighting or the person who's eating really loudly behind you and chips are all these inputs and sensory, and then you're distracted and you're staring off in the corner and you're looking at patterns in the bricks and admiring the patina. We're easily distractible. That's because we're still more drawn than anything to the physical world. And so the imperative for us becomes, how do we use this? And for us, it's an imperative of survival, because if we don't continue to keep people interested in what we're doing and creating in a digital space, then we'll die off, or we'll have to find new jobs. And I personally don't want to find a new job, because I think my job is best. And that's a consequence of one thing about digital storytelling that we have to really come to grips with. And that's that it evaporates very quickly now, especially because so much of it is being consumed in news feeds and in curated streams and in moments in time. And one of the most profound things I've ever heard about digital storytelling was, I was interviewing a intern candidate a few years ago, and I asked her, I was like, hey, so what do you think is wrong with digital storytelling today? And without flinching, and it didn't sound rehearsed or canned, she's like, there's no monuments to it. There's no digital, or there's no physical thing that reminds you of, whatsoever is like funny meme. The only time you're reminded of it is when someone maybe brings it up in a conversation, a similar topic, has some topical relevance to what you're talking about. A long-form piece you read on Medium about World War II. Maybe you're reminded of it when you see an old warplane on TV. But apart from that, those things evaporate very quickly. There's nothing that reminds us that they're there. And that's where I think the industry is going to shift a little bit. If we look at AR, right? AR now presents a whole new opportunity. And it's kind of this great equalizer. In the one sense, it gives a whole new relevance to things like print, billboards, magazines, newspapers, but also places. You think about like what Pokemon Go did. I don't know if you guys are familiar. It took people, it gave people a reason from a cell phone to walk outside and spend time and go to places, and incentivize people to be present in the physical world. And so, as storytellers, we have to recognize that what we should be doing is trying to find ways to bridge and connect these digital experiences with our physical experiences. Now, apart from AR, and the other side of AR, apart from giving things like photographs new meaning, is that it also gives the other side of it new places to live. Now, most of the time to experience 2D video content, it's got to be on a television or YouTube. Now it can be displayed, and eventually when you have this technology embedded in your the windshield of your car or your glasses, it's going to be everywhere. And so now we're giving a whole new set of homes for a lot of the content that we have traditionally relied on, even photography, visual components of digital storytelling have a whole new place to live. And so things like AR present a really great opportunity. And looking ahead even further at mixed reality, which for those of you that don't know is kind of like the HoloLens world where you wear this device that you can kind of transport in and out of an AR or a VR experience. You could be looking at something, be interested in it, and then all of a sudden that cues like an immersive 360 experience. That still relies and that honors our desire to be connected to the physical world. After about 5 minutes in a headset, the last thing I want to do is wear that thing on my head. I want to get out, I want to get some fresh air, I want to talk to somebody. It's a very isolating experience, and it's going to be a long time before we can feel authentically like we're connected with our friends in a VR space. Mixed reality offers an opportunity for VR to not, to not have that such a narrow window of interest to people who don't want to spend 2 hours in their gaming or seeing a concert with their friends in Taiwan, So transforming these formats into a bridge between the physical world that we experience every day and the digital world that we're obviously becoming more and more enslaved to. And trying to do that in a positive way, right? That's kind of why what drives us is we don't want these very powerful tools to fall into the wrong hands. We want to support the businesses that are doing well, that are doing good for the world and for their communities. We want to support the ideas that are contributing to the betterment of mankind. We want to highlight the forces that are working against that. And if we're not careful, and if we don't use these right, and other people start using them more cleverly than us, then we run the risk of handing over the keys to the nuke, to the wrong side. And I think, especially for PR folks, another thing that we're gonna have to start letting go of is some of the ownership around the branding of one, immersiveness, like we spoke earlier, but even the messaging around things. Recognizing that sometimes spreading an idea is more important than being known as the one that did it, right? Sure, in a board meeting you can use case studies about these projects, but part of disintegrating that barrier between the digital and physical world is removing all of those branding points and things that make people feel like there's an additional step to flowing fluidly between these experiences. So, at this point, I've talked a lot, and I was just recovering from getting sick, so I want to open this up a little bit to you all, if you have any questions. I definitely won't profess to know everything, and I probably don't know most of it, but at this point, I've spent a lot of time doing this stuff. And prior to immersive stuff, I did a lot of the, kind of multimedia and packaging, and we're going to talk more about that in the panel too. So, but if you have any questions about kind of where this is all heading, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Do you think, like, along with the virtual reality, being able to experience somebody else's experience, more people will not go out and make their own experiences? That they'll just be won't want to travel or something like that because they can do that right there. Do you think that is going to be like a barrier, or it could be something that is maybe?
It's going to work two ways. Yeah. Okay. So here's the question, and I'll pass the mic around to the next one. So the question was, do you think that by giving people these experiences, they're basically going to become less inclined to go out and get those experiences themselves? I think that's actually probably a bigger cultural question, which we've already experienced with television and video games and all these things. I think in some respects, if you can demonstrate the beauty of the world, you'll inspire people to go out and see it themselves, especially for people who may not have the means to go do that. Not everybody has the luxury of being able to go travel around the world. I mean, I get to do it because of my job, but in order for me to do it when I was younger, I had to save up for 6 months and eat out of a can of beans and ride chicken buses in Central America to make it happen for any sustained period of time. And so, but the insights that I got by going out and seeing the world, contribute to who I am today. So if in some small part we can give people that who may not have the means, then I think it will either encourage them or like a vitamin supplement part of that need in their soul to go see and feel these experiences. Now, and that's the other side of that, and the threat of it, which is to get people, is getting people too deep down the rabbit hole of VR, is that's our obligation as participants in the industry to, and that's why bridging that physical digital barrier is providing means and outlets out to the real world. And hopefully by improving the real world through our storytelling, we're giving people a reason to go out and do it. If the real world outside keeps getting worse, then yeah, we're just going to continue to enslave ourselves in the digital sphere, because it's something that is, it's a better experience. So that's, even at a human level, part of our obligation. Pass the mic.
Hello. You had mentioned moving from doing the storytelling yourself to helping others package their own stories. It's interesting to us, I think, working for a community development organization where we try and help people lift up their own stories, but how do you see that changing your kind of timeline to get products out, or timeliness, or does it matter? Or, I mean, you talked about being in Haiti for a day and a half, like, I mean, how do you see that role shifting, or do you still feel like you're there with them the whole time and you can get it out the same time? Or,
I mean, in that particular situation, we had a very tough call to make, because, in some of these places we only had like 3 hours, and so to identify a character, the only person we really interviewed in the 80s was the mayor of this town, Jeremy. That's because we barged into his office and begged him for 40 minutes. We wasted most of our time there to get an interview with him on the hilltop. And so it throws things off a little bit in the pre-production sense, because I think we used to, in a lot of the stories we want to go out and tell, we would try to prepare as much as we can advance as we could, shots and what kind of people we want to talk to and all that, because you don't have a lot of time. So part of it just means that you have to get really, really good, and go out in the field a lot and do it, but get really, really good at, if you don't have in the traditional documentary style where you go and embed for months or years at a time, getting really good at landing in a place and being super social with people and trying to identify those characters, or ahead of time trying to identify possible people. So yeah, it changes the way you pre-produce things a lot, and it changes the way that the post-production works, because you're kind of coming back with a mixed bag, rather than going out and shooting a story that you wrote out on a whiteboard beforehand and just plug in the pieces. It used to be that I could write a paper edit with time code of how we wanted the story to look, and we come in and drop in the footage, and drop in the interview of X person that said this thing that we all already wanted to. But then we're not really telling their story, we're just telling our preconceived interpretation of it. So it becomes harder in short time spans to do, and that's why with Haiti, we shifted more to focus on us as a journalist, which is not something that necessarily we're happy to do, but I think the piece came out pretty good, and we shifted the focus towards us, not because we wanted it to be about us, but because we didn't have the time to develop those. Now, if you think, and if you guys saw the Vietnam piece that Avery just came back from doing with one of my best friends and our other colleague, Karen, they worked with an organization. They spent tons of time finding and identifying possible people to speak to beforehand. There was a lot of forethought that went into it. They still came back with some really crazy insights. I mean, they ended up doing like investigative reporting, and it all got, it got really deep when they went out there. But the piece and the reflection in it, it's carried by the voices that are there. Really, the only foreign voices you hear are a caving expert who helped them identify the cave. This is the world's largest cave that they found, that a villager basically found in 1990, and then this British caving expert helped them uncover in like 2008 or 9. And then the other person that wasn't a Vietnamese voice was the ambassador to the U.S.
I do want to say that I appreciate you making the call to tell the story from your own perspective rather than voice it.
Thank you. Let's get that other mic. You guys want to pass that back? I'll trade you.
I got it.
Oh.
Hi there. I'm really enjoying your talk. I have some questions about the anxieties that you expressed about the future of AR and VR. You kind of mentioned like handing the keys over to people that we don't want to have the keys. And as a media professional, I'm totally interested and scared of what we're learning about how, Russia is taking over social media and feeding us back the tools that we've come up with to communicate with each other and change the landscape. So what is the nightmare that you're worried about? Can you give us an example of what's freaking you out? And I'm just so interested in how you're embedded in this world and what you see.
I mean, the nightmare to me isn't Russia taking over our brains with VR. Nightmare is people so jaded and disaffected by participating in the real world, which touches that they just chain themselves. It's like a Matrix version, Matrix / Wall-E world where you're just in a headset, sitting, being pumped full of things that have been engineered to keep us alive. I think that's the nightmare, and keeping people. If we're not using these resources, and even things like advertising, if we're not using them, I mean, we need commerce to survive as a race, right now. We need some form of enterprise. So it's not that advertising necessarily terrifies me, but it's things like, an oversaturation of advertisement for the wrong types of things that terrify me. So we have an obligation not just to, create better stories, but to make sure that when we are working with advertisers or working with people who have policy agendas that we're, kind of initiating, and that's why it's important that we come to this from this perspective of journalists, that we're vetting the origins, the intentions, and the validity and the truth of what they're trying to communicate. And we're trying to check that in a broader sense of keeping some sort of balance in the world so we don't teeter off into the apocalypse.
Is that what you think, empathy, the tool of augmenting empathy could really help with?
Yeah, to an extent. Yeah, definitely. And I think that it's just recognizing that it's one of many tools that we have to use to prod at people's empathy, and not using it as the only one, because if we abandon everything else, like I said, we're gonna get desensitized to that. So using it as part of a very robust set of tools, which is anything from looking at somebody in the eyes to sharing a viral meme that has some sort of compassionate, twist to it, to watching a really beautiful film that's scripted and has nothing to do with documentary, but it reminds you of the beauty of the world and reminds you to, connect with people on that level, to immersive experiences in VR that do that. I think that if we keep giving people a nice swirling set of experiences in all these different formats, real and digital, that we protect all of them from those diminishing returns.
Let's take one or two more questions.
I don't miss the days where I had to wear heels all the time. As a professor, I wear chucks.
Neither do I.
I was just wondering what you think in a world where people are still sort of trending towards the clickbait, where most of content is seen in news feeds, where you get your content or your story noticed or to stand out, and what is the best use of those tools instead of, there was an oversaturation of writing, of photography, now it's digital, but the storytelling still is there, but getting people to actually see it seems to be a lot more of the challenge than necessarily telling a good story, because the tools are so accessible to everyone.
Tell me about it. I wish I knew the answer to that part. I think step one right now is really sharpening the storytelling toolkit. The distribution part is something that we've had success and failures with. We're still trying to mobilize a lot of interest, for instance, around this Sundong piece. We thought we had a great viral news peg with King Kong, which is filmed in that same national park. We thought that there was a really interesting moment we could get the director to, who's a self-professed, unapologetic liberal to, be a stalwart for this, and it just hasn't, panned out that way. Now we're still trying, and we're still packaging, and we're and we're mobilizing a secondary PR push around it. But I think that's where PR comes in handy, because the truth is that unless Facebook self-corrects, that world is going to be where people, where just by pure like algorithmic determination, content like what you're describing is going to get buried, or is going to be deprioritized. It's not rapidly consumable and doesn't contribute to the metrics that help them make money. You know? So that's shifting to new platforms. That's, I mean, the value of the digital space is a new frontier all over, or of the physical space is a new frontier all over again. I mean, we could tomorrow build an AR app that if you stuck a, you know, a picture of a cave, you know, in 100 cities around the world, and got enough people interested, and got the media to write about it, and people would go up and hold their phones to it and experience it. So for us, I think that's why the physical space is becoming more and more important, because it's the one place that we can still compete for attention, where an algorithm doesn't tell you what to watch. So until we can get to that, I don't know if there's an answer.
One last question?
So other than Riot, what company or brand is doing very innovative just digital storytelling, essentially, and then what medium are they using for it?
I mean, in terms of the one that's most interesting right now for me, it's actually a universal media company, is Marshmallow Laser Feast. So we have this friend, Barnaby, who's this kind of kooky British dude, and he's developed a couple of these room scale VR experiences. Room scale means you can move around, so typically you're not talking about like a 360 video that's live captured. It's a lot of rendering and all that. So and we were just in Joshua together this past weekend, and his philosophy right now is creating these really crazy, beautiful experiences. This project that he's trying to wrap up right now is called Tree Hugger, which they basically went out to the Sequoia National Park, took like thousands of high-res photos of this sequoia tree and LiDAR mapped it and create this huge floating point matrix of this tree that you can stick your head in, and then with an artist rendered what it's like, the photosynthesis process, and seeing the energy move through that tree and did it in a very artistic way. It was not a realistic experience. So in the sense that it was immersive in connecting you to a real experience of being in front of a sequoia tree, like it was, you know, it's fiction, but the message and the ethos of it all the same exists. Now that runs into the challenge of how you distribute that. That requires a lot of hardware to mobilize that experience. But that's to me is some future level stuff. And then I guess I will call street artists a media company, because I think that there's a lot of political street art that is bringing headlines to the real world. And we've always loved the idea of the sides of buildings and billboards being sort of like a newspaper headline. And they're already doing it for us. So as a big collective, I think that's a really interesting space, and I will call them a media company.
Before we wrap up, will you tell them about the Pencils of Promise AR experience and taking the kids through the gallery that?
Which one?
Where you brought the kids in and.
Oh, okay. So this concept was based off an early AR thing that we did, which. Basically, we kind of like wanted to do a funny little like viral stunt video where we tricked this like group of kids to come to the office to come to an art exhibit, and what we did is we had a bunch of empty frames hanging on the walls, and so that we got them all excited outside, and they're like, wait, where did you get inside? And then they walk in and there's just like a bunch of empty frames, and we let them kind of like wig out for a moment, and then we handed them iPads and iPhones. And told them to hold them up and when they held them up, there was a bunch of paintings from the Louvre. And so they were looking at the Mona Lisa and they were looking at all these things. And I mean, that's like literally the most simple use of AR you could probably ever imagine, which is just turning an image trigger, a frame, to have a photo pop into it. I mean, to make it actually takes very little time. It's not very technical. What we were using was very simple. Anyone in this room could do that. But the reaction to it was pretty incredible. So things like AR in its infancy like this, sometimes the simple goes a long way. You don't need to have some crazy, like robot pop into your room and like pick up things. That's like on some crazy future level stuff. But it's easy to get excited to get people excited about that, because you can teleport people to the Louvre without putting a headset on them, and they have the ticket in their pocket. So yeah. So is it raffle time again?
Not right now.
Thank you. Thank you guys so much.
Hello everyone, my name is Anna Robinson. I'm the PR director for WVU PR SSA, and I'm also one of the event coordinators for Storytelling in a Digital Age. I wanted to let everybody know, if you're a non-WVU employee, we have created accounts for all of you to access the internet while you're here. If you have not yet done that or have any questions, please come see me, because I have all your login information here. Without further ado, it's time for lunch. We have volunteers in the back. Wave your hand. They are going to lead you upstairs. Thank you guys and enjoy.
So do we need to have an account for the workshops or something, or it's just if we want to?
Just if you want
Yeah,
to.
okay.
If you want to use the Wi-Fi.
Yeah, okay. I did have to. Hi, I was wondering if you were here. How are you? Good. What's your interest?
Does it look cool? Could you see it? Oh, your friend's on there.